speaker today is Charlie Mattioli. Charlie is a retired educator who has taught in Florida, Alaska, Indiana, and Tennessee at the junior high, high school, and college levels. He and his wife live on 11 acres near Elizabethton. He enjoys many outdoor activities, including building projects, fishing, hunting, gardening, traveling, and senior softball. He also enjoys playing the guitar, reading, and playing with the grandkids. He serves on Carter County's Parks and Rec Board and is on the board of directors of the Tri-Cities Senior Softball League. He has been actively involved with the Holston Valley Unitarian Universalist Church for the last 15 years. And he has spoken here before and was appreciated, and we appreciate having him back.
Thank you, Mike. It's always a pleasure to be here. I thought I'd start, the title of this is Divine Uncertainties, the Sacrament of Doubt in a Liberal Religion. And I'd like to start with a little story of a mother and a little girl both sitting at the table. The mother's doing some sewing. The little girl is coloring in her coloring book. And she looks over at her mother and she says, "Oh, Mama, when I was at Grandma's house yesterday, she gave me 2 pieces of pie." The mother looked up from her sewing and said, "She shouldn't have done that. 1 would have been plenty." Looking and seeing the girl's sort of dark and disappointed look on her face, she says, "Honey, someday when you get older, you'll find that you get wiser." The little girl then looked up and said, "But Mama, Grandma's a good deal older than you are." It's a little story to get us thinking about the fact that wisdom's not an easy thing to agree on. It's often difficult to impart to others. And sometimes a childlike query undoes the best sages and some of the wisdom we all think we carry around with us. Confucius once says that to know what one knows and to know what one does not know is true wisdom. And if we take that to heart with honest and humility, we all have to admit that what we don't know is much, much larger than what we do know. It therefore seems ironical, doesn't it, that when we're considering answers to some of the most difficult questions in life, those about life's great mysteries, there are so many who believe they have all the answers and that those answers are absolutely true. I think you all know the mysteries I'm talking about. Is there a God? What happens to us after we die? Do we have an immortal soul? How did this universe come to be? Do we humans have a special place or purpose? What is good and evil? And where can one find spiritual truth? I'm probably preaching to the choir here this morning because theologically most Unitarian Universalists are people who are almost like refugees. We've come from another religious tradition whose theology or doctrines we didn't find very comfortable or could agree with. For some of us, our spiritual totem is probably a question mark, because that's what we're doing a lot of. And we are at odds with most traditional religions, which have an absolute belief that they hold the truth, an unwavering claim to know God's will and word, and an exclusive path to eternal salvation. It shouldn't be surprising that so many people want absolutes, want some sort of divine guidance, or a promise of eternal salvation. Life for all of us is not an easy thing. It's got tragedy and sorrow. It's got a lot of uncertainty and change, loss, difficult choices, and of course, it ends in death. But this morning, I would like to consider these questions. Are such certitudes possible? Do they serve our individual spirit well? Is it possible that doubt and uncertainty about these great mysteries may be necessary and beneficial to a rich spiritual life? And is our liberalism enough in itself to make us worthy here as Unitarian Universalists of a spiritual community? I was born in a religious tradition of truth with a capital T and certainty with a capital C, Roman Catholic. And as a young child, I was steeped in its belief, its prayers, its rituals, and its sacraments. But as you grow, so do questions and so do doubts. And I can remember when I was 14, I went to confirmation, the sacrament of confirmation, and you get a confirmation name, but lost my faith. I just remember that as a period where, it was a paradox. You're supposed to confirm your faith with that sacrament, and it turned out being quite the opposite for me. For those of you who might not be familiar with Roman Catholicism, I got to tell you that in my religious training, we never once saw a Bible. It was all catechism. So it was kind of interesting when I got a little older and we moved and there were more Protestants around that I learned something new, that it was the Bible that was God's Word and something that should be read for one's salvation. And I got pretty excited about it, and I took it upon myself to start reading the Bible. My studies didn't go well. I found the Old Testament difficult, confounding, troubling, and in many ways it dulled my sense of enlightenment or spiritual awakening. There were parts, especially the parables of Jesus, that resounded with me. But most of all, even in the New Testament, it didn't seem like God speaking to one of his children, and it's certainly not to me. And I had felt more spiritually under a starry sky than I had felt in my study of the Bible. So from that spiritual journey, I know what it means to ask questions, to doubt and be a serious seeker. I know the sense of frustration you have when everybody around you has the answers and wondering why you don't. I felt the pull of the subtle and powerful pressures that go with the flow, just accept the cultural norms. I know the condemnation that comes with not holding orthodox beliefs, being told that a moral life was impossible and eternal damnation was probably a certainty. But my choice of doubt and uncertainty, as I'm sure many of yours, came neither out of rebelliousness, selfish pride, or anything like that. It was more intuition. It was personal reflection. It was honest openness. I accepted my choice because it was the only one I could make. And I lived with what many consider an impossibility, and that is to lead a moral life without having, orthodox beliefs. I never felt morally lost or damned. I always thought life was a gift, even as a very young boy, a sacred pursuit. And I considered ethical, moral life necessary to a good life. This is an old problem. In the 17th century, how many of you heard of Pascal's wager? Anybody read about him? He was a great philosopher and mathematician. And he proposed this wager. He said, if there's a God, this God is infinitely incomprehensible and has neither parts nor limits, and so we have no affinity to really know God. But, we have to take a stand because we are embarked in life. So he said, let's look at this mathematically. This is why it's a wager. If you believe in God and there's none, what have you lost? But if you say there's a God and there's a God, you've won everything. So for the atheist, he gains nothing if there's a God. In fact, he loses. And if there's no God, he doesn't gain anything either. And an agnostic, that's an untenable position for Pascal because as he says, we're embarked on life. You can't just say, hey, I don't know. And there's certainly nothing at the end of the tunnel for you. But I remember after reading that, I said, believing in God in a wager like that, how's that going to work with an omniscient God who knows not only our fears, but what's in our hearts? Could a soul's destiny for eternity really be dependent on your choice of theological faith and not the life that you live? Could such a fate be so dependent on the dice throw of your family, your culture, or your time, your place? The answer for me was no. For me, the 19th century philosopher Herbert Spencer, I thought, was very clear about some of the problems we have in thinking about things like that. He said, in the matters of ultimate ideas and divine uncertainties, the answers to a lot of these questions are something that will lead us to inconceivabilities. For instance, the argument that there's a God comes from this notion that there has to be a first cause, something intelligent, some power had to create everything. But then the child asks you this: who created God? So if God existed forever, could there be a universe that existed forever? Well, even that gets you into inconceivabilities. Who in here can picture something that went on for infinity? Yet, who in here can conceive of something that started from nothing? Who in here can conceive of a universe that we live in right now that sort of stops someplace out there? On the other hand, who in here can conceive and really understand, get their head around a universe that goes on forever? So, this is an agnosticism that you'll find in Buddhism, humanism, and Confucianism, which stayed away from a lot of these. You have to have an answer to those questions. To say there's a God, to say there's not a God, or to say you can't know, are assertions everybody can make. Each one of us have that choice. But the answers are outside the realm of objective proof, or everybody agrees this is the wisdom for all. And consider all the answers that humans have made on that question since the beginning of time. It's impossible for all of them to be right. So many of them are contradictory. There's no objective way to prove any of that. So we must make our own decision based on our own spiritual search and our own faith, our own experience. And this is going to take humility, and it's going to take courage. A humility that insists there's a freedom for all of us to search and choose. A courage that declares it's not that a label that matters anyway, but the life that I live. Most Unitarians seem to do well with this ultimate uncertainty. How else could it be that we oftentimes say in the pulpit we don't believe in prepackaged paradigms? How else could it be if we believe that even in spiritual matters, the test of reason and experience count a great deal? How else could it be if we say there are many paths to the sacred? So doubt becomes a cornerstone in a liberal religion because exclusive, imperious certainties deny reason, free inquiry, or even a real journey. In fact, we humans are most dangerous when we're certain about things, aren't we? If you read history, it's replete with horrors because some group that had power had absolute beliefs about a lot of these final things. How many have heard of Eric Hoffer? Anybody ever read his books? He goes way back. He was a longshoreman in San Francisco. Didn't get much of schooling. He's self-educated. He read books, all the great philosophers, and anyway, he really got interested in this idea of mass movements and the true believer. And I want to read a quote from one of his books, The True Believer, because it's very interesting. It's a very interesting psychological understanding. He said, "To be in possession of an absolute truth is to have a net of familiarity spread over the whole of eternity. There are no surprises. There's no unknowns. All questions have already been answered. All decisions made. All eventualities are foreseen. The true believer is without wonder and hesitation. How does this work? He goes on and says, the effectiveness of a doctrine doesn't come from its meaning, but its certitude. No doctrine, however profound and sublime, will be effective in garnering true believers unless it is presented as the embodiment of the one and only truth. It is obvious, therefore, that in order to be effective, a doctrine must not be understood, but must be believed in. We can be absolutely certain only about things we do not understand. The devout are always asked to seek the absolute truth with their heart, not their minds. One has to get to heaven or the distant future to determine the truth of an effective doctrine. Anything simple must be made vague, complicated, and pregnant with meaning. He said, thus there is an illiterate air about the most literate true believer, unquote. And he was talking, of course, not only about mass movements in religion, but even the mass movements, the fascist movement, communist movement, movements that sort of grab people and become almost a religion in themselves. And another interesting book that, if you're really interested in human history, is Daniel Boorstin's The Discoverers. He also wrote one called The Creators. But in the introduction to his book, which is this voluminous study of how all the great discoveries in all these different fields were made, fascinating. In the introduction, he says this. This is the common thread in human history. The great obstacle to discovery is not ignorance, but our illusions of knowledge. You may have had a grandmother who put it a little bit more succinctly, who said, it's not what you don't know that hurts you, it's what you know that ain't so. And boy, we've all had that experience, haven't we? Sometimes it's with the car. We don't know what we're doing, but we kick the tire and lift the hood up. Sometimes we get in more trouble than if we just left it alone. If you think about it that way, and you think about how against the backdrop of collective common sense, of myth and dogma and facts, that there were individuals who had the courage, imagination, and achievements that opened up new worlds of discovery. But consider their faiths: Galileo, Bruno, Socrates, or Jesus. It's a challenge. New ideas are scary. But you know, divine uncertainties, I think, are vital to our own integrity. Whom on this earth can claim they know the absolute truth? Does one person's revelation bind another's? I don't think so. Haven't all people in every culture and every time had contact with the great mysteries, wondered about the same questions we wondered about? I think they did. I think that they can remain mysteries and still be an inspiration to us. You know, the Greeks had a warning about arrogance. They said, do not hold your thoughts too high. Life is short, and we are but humans. So here in this church, we can celebrate our liberalness, our openness, our having a wide spectrum of theological, philosophical beliefs, from one end of the spectrum to the other. But is that all we should celebrate? Is that enough to give meaning, direction, or peace to our lives? In fact, one of the criticisms of our Unitarian Universalism is that people look at it and say, you know, we think it's an excuse for being uncommitted spiritually. That's what your problem is. And not paying more attention to morality. I mean, what makes you different than the Boy Scouts or the Elk Club? They covenant values. And a Boy Scout, you know about the Scout oaths, you know about the Scout laws. What makes us a spiritual community right here? Is it, do you use statements? Is it your vision statement? I believe that's not enough. I believe the sacred must be here too. An individual sense of reverence for what is important in life. In the absence of the sacred, where do we find the will to do what is difficult? and right? Where comes our source of strength and peace when tragedy and loss befall us? Something must be embedded in our character, not just our ethics. Something must be felt at our profoundest spiritual self. I think it's only with that sense, that depth of character and spiritual reverence, that we can, with our diverse beliefs, assert through our choices, our actions, and our lives, lead a loving, compassionate life. Demonstrate it's not an impossibility to leave these mysteries be, to not have all the answers and yet be loving. It's even echoed in the Bible, in James 2. What does it profit, my brethren, if a man says he has faith but not works? Faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. I, by my works, will show you my faith. And that's true of all of us. Whatever your faith is, if you're living it with integrity, it shows. It shows in what choices you make and the way you live. So whether you're a deist, a theist, an agnostic, an atheist, a humanist, divine uncertainties and theological doubts can be sacred. They become called sacred if they are our incentive to look within, to think deeply, to search horizons, to find the best in ourselves. In other words, to be a seeker. If they foster a real basis for letting others have the freedom to do likewise and seek the truth and search the many paths that may lead to it. And if our doubts encourage us to think larger and deeper and wider than prepackaged paradigms, if our uncertainties allow us to recognize the mysteries as truly universal challenges for every life, and help us feel humility and reverence such a search deserves. I think it's only with divine uncertainties that makes possible a God, a spirit, you may call it a mystery, whatever you want to call it, of incomprehensible dimensions, and not one created by limited minds with a narrow perspective, or coming from a single culture. They can open up paths to our understanding both the universe and life, but it requires courage and responsibility. So doubt becomes a sacrament if it confers upon us a grace which allows the greatest faith of all, an openness worthy of the great mysteries before us. We can gain reverence from letting the mysteries be. We can more clearly cherish our common humanity and its wide search for answers throughout time and place and culture. And we can sense that it's not in spite of these mysteries, but because of them, we can find passion and peace and strength and wonder in our lives. In your hymnal, there's a song called "We Laugh, We Cry." I don't know if you sang it very much in here, but I'm not crazy about the tune. I'm not crazy about a lot of the tunes and hymnals, but we're, like most Unitarian Universalists, what are we doing? We're reading the words. And what impressed me when we were singing it in our church is this is the last line in that. And in our search for peace, maybe we'll finally even see that even to question truly is an answer. The question is truly an answer. You know, I believe, everybody has some statements that sort of are kind of like posts in the ground and anchors for us. I believe Carl Sagan, in the fewest words, put who we are in the clearest form. He said, "We are stardust contemplating the stars." And in another sermon or lecture, I remember one time explaining the evolution of elements and how they were formed. And this is true. I mean, it is literally actually true. So we should feel an overwhelming gratitude to know that we should know and feel to be the explorers we are. We are part of the universe that's somehow been created and evolved to actually contemplate the universe. I don't think leaves do it. I don't think most animals do it. We do. And it may be a source of some of our insecurities, our problems, and a lot of other things. But it's also a tremendous gift. I think one time in a former sermon that I gave here, I said, it was called Faith and Miracles. I said there are 3 miracles I believe in. It kind of comes from the Native American tradition. First great miracle, the universe exists. And you can look at a miracle as something you can't explain, okay? But unbelievable, right? The second one is that there's life, that somehow out of all these inorganic, compounds and elements and the fires and the salts that make up the universe, this beautiful planet we live on has so much life. And then the third great miracle is you and me, that we have this consciousness that asks these questions, that reflect, that wonder about how we wonder. So, thank you.